Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. This is the third workshop in the Rebuilding Better residential workshop series. My name is Kayla Bethel. I am the Sustainability Coordinator with the City of Louisville. This workshop series is a partnership between the City of Louisville, the Town of Superior, and Boulder County. And so we have staff from all three municipalities here tonight, as well as a variety of different speakers. So first, I just want to say thank you to everyone for taking time out of your night to come here tonight. This is also a hybrid meeting, so hello to all the people on Zoom that are with us tonight as well. Here's our little camera in the middle. So we're going to do our best to answer all of your questions that you have here tonight in person, and then also get to some of our virtual attendees' questions as well. Before we start, I just want to highlight your packet. So everyone should have a packet of information that kind of walks you through the information that we are going to be presenting tonight. If you missed workshops 1 or 2 and you're interested in what information was covered in those workshops, we have the workshop, the handouts for workshops 1 and 2 in the back, along with an Xcel Energy rebate application if you're interested in that. There's also a link to a survey up on the screen. There's also, you should have a paper version of the survey, so we'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback on this workshop, as well as any questions that you might have. We might not get to all the questions depending on how many there are and how much time we have. We'll try our best. So if we are not able to get to your question, please write it down on your comment card and leave it for us on the table outside as you leave. Or if you're on Zoom, if you type your question into the chat, we'll make sure that we collect all of those questions. We'll send the questions out to our speakers like we did last time, and we'll make sure that we send a follow-up document with all of your questions and all of the answers from our speakers tonight. So just to give you an idea of what's ahead, here's our agenda for tonight. So first, we will have Colin from Hewitt. He'll be talking about the rebuilding timeline a little bit. Then we'll really look at how all of these different rebate programs fit into the rebuilding timeline. And we'll bring up speakers from Xcel, Boulder County, and the Department of Local Affairs, DOLA, to talk about the different rebate programs that we have available. Then we'll break for questions on part 1. So if you have any questions for Colin about the rebuilding timeline or any questions about the rebate programs, we'll have some dedicated time for part 1 questions. Then we'll move into part 2, which is energy raters. So Robbie from Boulder County will give us a short overview of energy raters. Who are they? How do they fit into your larger rebuilding team? And then we'll bring up a panel of energy raters to answer questions that you may have about how energy raters roles. Then we'll open it up for more questions. So if you didn't get your questions answered in the first break for questions, we'll have more time for additional questions at the end. And then the last half an hour, we'll open it up. We'll stop the virtual presentation and we'll open it up for networking. So you can talk with the experts in the room, get your specific questions answered. And like I said, if you need to leave or if we don't get to your question, make sure to write it down and we'll follow up with you. So again, thank you to everyone, all of our speakers that are here tonight and all of you for coming and spending time with us tonight. And with that, I will turn it over to Colin Bunker with Hewitt. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm nervous now for the first time, but anyway, it's impressive to see everybody out here. Appreciate that. Like she said, my name is Colin. I'm with Hewitt, and it's kind of a larger construction company. I'm actually part of a team that's building a water treatment plant over by Golden, just off Highway 93. And so I basically am here. I've been working with some residents, Town of Superior, trying to help mow through some obstacles that they were facing in this rebuilding effort. And during some of the various conversations that we were having, basically determined that it might help people to put together a small and simple scheduling tool, which you can find on the last couple pages of your handout. Okay, and then on the back page, there's actually a QR code that will link you to the download. And the intent of this little simple schedule is to be a tool for you that might have been put into the position of project manager against your volition. And you might not necessarily have had experience navigating a project of this magnitude. And, you know, it might not be in a place right now where you feel like you have your arms around it, or you might not feel like you have, you know, the right questions in mind because you might have never been put into this position before. So the simplicity of it is there's, you know, basically rows down the sheet that are all representative of some action that may have to happen for you to ultimately achieve what is a move-in milestone, which is kind of that. So the way this thing works, it's a Gantt schedule, and pretty much you got a start date, finish date, and then you can paint out the timeline over there in pretty little bars. And effectively, depending on your own situation and some of your own decisions and your own build team, you know, you'll have your very own timeline. And, you know, I work on multi-$100 million, potentially $1 billion jobs, depending on where I am. And no matter what, we always have this underlying tool of a project schedule to help our clients keep their arms around it, because things can go awry. You know, depending on what this schedule looks like in your case, it might affect your funding timeline. It might affect some temporary lease that you have. You know, it might affect your cash flow, right? Like a lot of that stuff kind of is derived from a basic underlying scheduler. And so the hope of this is to just be your tool to kind of transform into that project manager if you've never really been in that role before. So the first several items are kind of plugs to get people signed up with different support, whether it's a community group like this that you come to meetings to, whether it's some of the energy consultants that you're going to hear later on. But ultimately, it starts boiling down as to how are you going to build it, right? Who are you going to build this with? Is it going to be something you're doing on your own, or you've got a contracted builder in mind? But effectively, in most cases, the cascade or the schedule really launches as you start to hone in on that commitment. And ideally, that commitment is affected by some of the discussions that you'll have with that builder that bring you to an acceptable timeline. And so this was kind of focused on the town of Superior and some of their permitting requirements, and some of the things that were highlighted there, and some of the challenges some of those residents were having. And so I'm just going to kind of go down and talk through some of the thought process and talking points just for you to consider. 10 minutes isn't really a lot of time for questions and answers, but I'm just going to try to give you the intent. And I'll be around the rest of the day. If you've got questions, you want a small group in the back, we can build your own schedule together. It's all good. But ultimately, what we saw was that effectively everybody needed their properties demoed back out. And at that point was about the first time they could get in to do a geotech investigation. And if you guys don't know that basically somebody's going to come drill a hole and they're going to get a soil sample, and that'll help your designers figure out your structural design. Okay, it's like an input to your design. But what not a lot of people were aware of is that, you know, those drillers weren't immediately available, and that they had a processing time before they could turn around their results. And those had to be in the hand of the builder before they finalized their structural design, before it got submitted. And so what this was hoping to do was simply make people aware of that, and then potentially put you in the position to have that discussion with your builder. You're like, okay, where are we at with geotech? Do you need it? Where is it? Where are the people? What's my timeline? Are we on a list? Are they going to mow? There was residents in Superior that were able to kind of group together, and builders group together, and they got a lot of stuff, right? Because they recognized the pressure. And so again, several of these first items are what I would say are design inputs that need to be worked through to get to your permit submission. And to be honest, I didn't actually study Louisville's requirements. So I'm a little ignorant there. I imagine they're very similar, but basically to get to the point of your plan set, geotech was one of those potentially multi-month hurdles that needs some pressure up front if it doesn't already have it by your builder. And so again, some of these things were hopeful that you'd be armed with these kind of discussion points, maybe in your conversation with the builder, and just say, hey, I want to understand your timeline. These are some of my concerns, and go from there. And so along with that, you know, there was actually coming with a house design. Like again, the communities I was dealing with, a lot of people were going with kind of mass builders that had about 6 or 7 typical layouts. And that's what they have. That's kind of on deck. They've got most of it together. They got most of it ready. The risk is when you start customizing those standard things, what does that start doing to their timeline working for you? Can they accommodate them? Can they turn them around that fast? Do they need to send it out to some special analysis? It might just change the timeline. And so if you're in the position of kind of working through that design, it's good to be upfront when you ask the questions, be like, hey, this is kind of what I want, but what's it going to do to me? Like, what's it going to do to the overall timeline? Maybe it's not worth it at that time to make that change or whatever. And so again, just a consideration point about the timing it takes your builder to get your plans together and how some of your involvement may or may not impact that timeline. Okay, so again, looking at just coming down the list, basically there was requirement for drainage plan, and that required some survey and some analysis. And so again, depending on what services your builders provided, that might just be incidental. You know, it's like, okay, got all this, got all this. That's usually the best answer. If you've made a deal with the builder and you expect to have a house and just give you the key after about 12 months or whatever, hopefully they've got most of this covered. So it's not meant to scare you or intimidate you or say that there's all these new obstacles. It's just kind of being aware of some of the stuff that might go into getting your permit turned in, your design plans turned in. Okay. And then having something to ask about if you're, you know, driving by your property and wondering about progress, you know, maybe you'll have a few things to check in on some detail and basically say, hey, are we still on track to meet this permit submission thing, right? So then survey and document creation is kind of along that same line. Again, when we were talking with some of the folks at Superior, there was concerns because there's been some damage to electrical utilities, right? Like some of the power infrastructure is just gone. And, you know, some of the conversations we had in town, it was really nice and helpful, I'd say, to talk to, was that, hey, we know you might not know where your connection's going to be. And we talked about having bubbles of TBD on the plan sets to say, hey, we know that I have to find my connections in my property, but you haven't told me where the big connections are yet. So I don't want it to slow down my permit, but I'm just going to mark it TBD. And I heard somebody in the back talking earlier about a concern of that overall utility infrastructure timeline. And we had heard really good feedback from Superior about Xcel's willingness to answer the call when it comes time to get permanent power routed to the houses. But it kind of needed the spark of all the permit submissions to really put that priority to the right place in the list. So some of the cumulative actions, I think, amongst the group, you'll find actually are triggers for some of that broader action taken. And I think people are aware of kind of the plight of this whole group. And I think a lot of those big companies are ready to respond in a good way. So that was very encouraging to hear. And so really get down, you know, finalize plans for submittal. You basically work through some of the hurdles. You know, you put your finishing touches on with the builder, and it's the house that you want that's going in. It's a question of is Louisville set up? You know, if that's your permitting agency, are they ready to go? Do you know their timeline? Do you know what the turnaround's expected to be? You know, that a lot of these durations, I should have prefaced this maybe a little bit better. This is for you to kind of fill out and customize. The duration column is simply calendar days, and it's meant for you to overwrite it if you have better information about your circumstance. Sometimes as you're thinking through this, you might find connections or start dates or logic you want to put in. You can overwrite the dates, make it your own. But, you know, ideally as you have those conversations, you understand that permit turnaround expectation, you can populate it and say, okay, Takes you 3 weeks, takes you 6 weeks. That's what I have to expect because that's what you told me to do. And that's going to be a predecessor for my next step. And again, I can only speak to the town of Superior, but they were pretty optimistic. They set themselves, I think it was about a 3-week timeline, which is fantastic in my experience. And they voiced a commitment to try and make it. So I assume there's some parallel going on here in this town with people.
First reading with other towns too.
Okay, so again, that's from my experience, I think big jobs permitting could be a very big problem, and 2 to 3 weeks is generally an outstanding first turnaround. So hopefully that goes smoothly for you all. So then it gets into the kind of the really big hairy conversation pieces with whoever your builders are, and it looks really simple because we condensed them down to a couple lines. But we've got a line called Procurement of Materials and Mobilization of Trades. Okay, it's basically, all right, you got the permit through. When are you going to show up? When are you actually going to be there starting to do work? And I think what you'll find is that some of the builders have X amount of capacity. They might be able to start X amount of homes per month, and you might be somewhere on their list. And again, not trying to pressure. I know I can't even imagine. It's a tough situation. It's not meant to be a pressure speech. It's meant to just be one that gives you information that you can plan around. And part of that information is the tough conversation with the builder about, hey, where do I really land on the list? Right? Do you keep a list? How many homes are you? Where are you going to start? Right? So that whole line of procurement, materials, mobilization is really just trying to hone in on a very personal conversation between you and your builder about, okay, we got all that other stuff out of the way. When are you going to show up? Because it might be a little bit later. Some of the custom home builders might only have a few houses here, and they might be booked up. And so it's a really good thing during the selection period to kind of just be upfront with that and make sure that they're upfront with you on. Because it might not be exactly what you want to hear, but hopefully they're just honest and it gives you something predictable to plan your life around. Okay, because I think some of the builders we were talking about, it was literally the eight per month type range. And so again, they were talking to lots of people and some of their whole year this year was getting booked up. And as you can see by this document, it was about 2 months ago, a month and a half ago, and those lists keep churning. And so really that's what that's for. It's just trying to get on the same page with the builder about show up time. And then a lot of these, builders have pretty predictable durations in a normal market. And unfortunately, with wars and chip shortages and all sorts of other things going on, we were finding like a 25 to 40% increase in overall duration just to get the home built. And I think there was some very special exceptions related to like appliances and stuff that are just hard to come by, I guess, in the world right now. And so that might be one of your early conversation pieces. But a lot of the production builders we were talking to seem to have a pretty good handle on those supply chains. And it seemed like they were within 6 to 8 month kind of builds. But again, this is just a generic, just to put a placeholder. And the idea is, so here it's saying 270 calendar days for construction, roughly a 9-month commitment. And it is whatever you guys are making the agreement with your builder on. And a lot of them, honestly, from what we heard, won't promise. But you say, hey, I just need an indication, right? I just need what your best guess is. Sorry, questions?
This year's example there shows the construction started in February. That realistic now for Superior? Something was this just kind of global?
What's the question? The question is February a realistic start time for, you're saying starting now? Yeah, most of the production builders we had talked to, which was a couple, didn't indicate that they wouldn't build during winter. I've heard of a couple, maybe California newcomers that have been talking about winter. This is a scary deal, but I think a lot of the people who work around Colorado work through.
I'm just surprised they didn't start earlier than rather than I was hoping for October, November or something.
Well, and this isn't supposed to be a depressing thing or any sort of impression of what your situation looks like. what this is supposed to be helping with is consideration of the things that lead in permitting, a discussion about how long it's going to take you builders from permitting to start, and then what they think your overall duration is. Because if they do have, some of them might take the winter off. I don't know, right? Like there's real funny things that you might get to in the detailed conversation that just blow you away. But I think if you can get to the point where you've got this overall high level timeline and some discussion history where you have the commitment made to you, it helps you a lot in those follow-up conversations where you're like, I made this decision because of what you told me, and now I expect you to follow through with it. You know, and that's even, like I said, we didn't get the warmest budget that a lot of people were going to guarantee 7 months, but they might be comfortable enough to give you the range that it's, hey, 6 to 8. You know, that's what we're pushing for. And you know, unfortunately, some of these things are subject to construction risks, weathering, and supply. But again, ideally, this gives you a footing to stand on when you're in those discussions, or maybe things. Yes, sorry.
We talked about against it. Do you have any advice about when we're doing custom versus the production home builder in terms of schedule?
You know, I think
by that, like the production, production home builder may be able to get your home along faster.
well, I'll just it might help to just do a couple of more examples and a little bit of anecdote. But we talked to a production builder in Superior who basically bet that people would sign up and went ahead and moved some of these activities forward on their own dime, just thinking that they'd get people and they wanted to help them as fast as possible. I was amazed, and it was very nice. And they were able to organize mass geotech ahead of what other builders might have done if they were waiting on a signed agreement. Right. And then in addition to that, I'd say the benefits from what I could tell, because again, I'm not a home builder, so this is from education and talking to the home builders. The production builders were pretty well tied into typical suppliers with very standardized materials for their 6 layouts about, right? And that allows them the speed of not shopping around, not customizing design, and having a predictable supplier who does this all the time for them. And it was actually both the production home builders basically would get their stuff from the same suppliers. And so those were some of the production style advantages, right? Obviously with the custom, you've got more freedoms, right? But with more freedoms comes more time up front, a lot of times narrowing down those decisions. And then the riskier part on the custom side is both duration and when they're committed to your project. And so these 2 ones we've just been dwelling on pretty hard, I would say are more of the major conversation to have if you're thinking the custom route, because again, their capacity just might not be the same. I'm way over time as I expected I would be.
Hold your question.
But again, I really appreciate the commentary and the thoughtfulness, and I hope this helps serve as a tool in the journey.
Thank you. Okay, hold your questions on. If you have more questions for Colin, we'll take a break for questions in just a bit. We are going to move on to the next part in our program. So first up, we have Rob Buchanan here from Xcel Energy. Sorry, we have you locked off here. So I'll pass it over to Rob to talk about the Xcel Energy rebates available.
Hey, thank you. I'm going to try to keep it as brief as I think I reasonably can. We're going to talk quickly about the incentives. I'm going to offer a little bit of information that isn't built on here. I want to clarify that the sheet that you received in the back was a registration form. It was not a rebate application. The rebate application isn't quite done yet. The registration serves a couple of purposes. The first is to give you a sense of holding you and your builder mutually accountable to what you're trying to achieve. And then the second reason is to give us a sense of what the timeline looks like of what our of how much of our budget and how we're going to pay that out and when that's going to come through. So that's the purpose of the registration form. It is a nice to have for every tier except for the passive house and FIAS certifications. We need that for passive house and FIAS. So if that's the direction you're going to go, please make sure that that you're registering the project. The 5 tiers that we're incentivizing are up on the screen right now in your packet. If you are only going to bill to the prevailing energy code, IECC 2021, the baseline code, that's a rebate of $7,500. The rebates will be paid when the home is finished, and they are customer rebates, so those are going into your pocket. The next tier is the new Energy Star version 3.2 certification. That's a $10,000 rebate. The next one above that is Department of Energy's latest version of the Zero Energy Ready Home. That is a $12,500 rebate. The next tier is Energy Star Next Gen. This is a entirely new offer from Energy Star that they just introduced to the public last October. It was finalized, I think, in May, and this is ready for prime time. This is, and that if you build to that standard, it's an incentive of $17,500 from us. And then if you go all the way to the passive house performance tier, if you build a house that meets the standards of either of the certifying bodies, either FIAS PHIUS or PHI Passive House Institute, that'll be an incentive of $37,500. The last thing I want to make clear is there's a reason the incentive to get to passive house is so high, because it's a very difficult standard to meet. If you have a builder who says, if you go to a builder and say, can you build a passive house? And they say, yeah, sure. Be very cautious of that assertion. Ask to see some certifications, ask if they've been trained, ask for all those things, because it isn't a standard that you can just try. You need additional builders and even designers and consultants need additional training and additional skills to be able to build to those standards. So I think I made up some of the time. I'm going to hand it over to Rafi. I'll answer questions. In the interest of keeping us on time, I promise you I will stick around as long as I need to. I'll answer any questions that you have at the end.
And we are sending out the slides. We are sending out.
We are sending out the
We're
slide.
going to send about this afternoon.
So I'm Ravi Schwartz, the new home building advisor in Boulder County for the Marshall Fire. One of my roles is to explain what those programs are that are being incentivized. So if you have questions about what it actually means to build to Energy Star, to build to the DOE program or whatnot, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Have your builder reach out to me, your architect, Energy Rater, anybody you want to. Today we're going to talk. A little bit about the cost of construction, because that's been one of the biggest questions that people have had out there. Because of COVID and our current economic situation, I guess, it's really difficult to nail down the cost of construction. But we have 2 resources that we're going to be looking at. The first resource is a study that the city of Louisville did back in February. Now, before COVID, going from the 2018 to the 2021 codes was roughly anticipated to be, in that $5,000 to $10,000, maybe $12,000 range, and that came from studies that the Pacific Northwest Labs did and others did. But COVID really has changed the situation, and again, it's very difficult to understand exactly where the cost of construction is at until you actually start buying materials and whatnot. But the study that the city of Louisville did with a 2,800 square foot house, a little over 2,800 square foot house, demonstrated that the incremental cost between getting to the 2018 and to the 2021 ICC was roughly in that $34,000 range there.
Building on that, we go to the next slide. We have a home builder in the Marshall Fire area that has just released and made public their pricing on houses there. And what they have done is an exercise in pricing that is fixed pricing for these 12 models that they've released. And they are offering it at the 2021 IACC level, all electric. So that would be equivalent to the rebate incentive level of the Energy Star 3.2 checklist and Next Gen program. The Next Gen part of the Energy Star program is just taking that home to electrification, meaning that you have to do heat pump heating, cooling, for example, heat pump water heating, for example, and some other things. You can see that the price ranges a little bit, and in there, if you take into account the incremental cost of going from the 2018 to the 2021, plus the incentives for electrification, the homes on their lower scale, it's actually about roughly $10,000 cheaper to go to the 2021 IACC with that electrification program. And on the larger side, it's about $10,000 more. But what's really interesting is in that house that's in this case, it's 27,000. It's roughly that 2,800 square feet, similar to the Lafayette example. It's right around between 18 and 38,000. So right in that range that Lafayette came up with in their study that they did with Group 14, which is an engineering company. So we see that the incremental cost of construction is not as great as we might have heard from some players in the industry early on in our cycle that were saying, it's going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars, basically increased cost of construction. Now,
what's the jump? Why is it like an incremental here and 20,000 more than here?
why is it more for larger houses?
No, it's like the first.
Between the 2,700 square foot house and the 3,000 square foot house, there's a difference in the price range.
Yeah, so there are probably certain things going on there that would, for example, mean that you might need a much larger and potentially two HVAC systems to heat and cool the house, and things like that would cause the price of construction to increase. So probably not wrong. We go to the next slide. These aren't. These are numbers, they're estimates. What we do know is that the numbers that were released by the builder in that example, those are fixed prices. So I was talking with somebody today, and they're building basically a 2,100 square foot house. They had a fixed budget that they had worked out with their insurance company at $700,000, and they were worried that wasn't enough. Well, this is an example that you could take to your builder, your designer, and whatnot, that says, one builder is able to build that size house for less than $700,000. So it's just an example of kind of what's going out there in the marketplace right now. Now, pricing obviously is made up by tons of different factors out there. It's really not as simple as it says up there as materials and labor and costs. We have supply chain issues. Now that we didn't have in pre-COVID, we have experience levels of builders out there, and a lot of builders, especially on the custom side, haven't built an Energy Star house before, or haven't built a Department of Energy zero energy ready home before. So in essence, they don't know what they don't know. They don't know what they're going to be getting into per se, and we'll get into that a little bit more when we talk with the energy raters there. But they might be giving you estimates that are inflated because they're trying to cover that unknown quantity that's there. So it's make sure you keep that in mind. And then the last thing is really that home performance is just part of the equation. From the county's perspective, from my personal perspective, home performance is the key to ensure that you're going to have a comfortable home, that you're going to have a home that meets your modern expectations of living in a house, and also maximizes basically your opportunity cost. That's everything that happens before drywall happens on that house, and also your cost of living in that house, which is an equation that we often don't think about, that additional cost of utilities and other things like that. So, yeah, so okay, that's fine. So the other, there is another incentive payment that does layer on top of all the Xcel Energy incentive payments, and that is an incentive payment that the state of Colorado is offering, and that is a $10,000 incentive payment for electrification. So what does electrification mean? It means that you are electrifying your cooking with conduction cooktop and convection oven, that you're electrifying your heating and cooling system with the heat pump system, and that you're electrifying your water heating with a heat pump water heater. This program also requires that you permit the house using the 2021 IECC there, and you can add on that $10,000 to any of the incentive payments there. But consider that adding that on to the Next Gen program, which is the other Xcel incentivized program to go to electrification. You're going to get a total incentive payment of $27,500. Now, the Energy Star Next Gen program layers on one additional requirement of electrification, and that you have a EV electric vehicle charging station ready. So you pull the wires to that location so that it's already there and ready. So sometime in the future, if you buy an electrical vehicle, it's there. You can make it active if you want to. You're not required to make it active. There. Do you have anything else? Okay. So we just wanted to make sure you were aware of that incentive.
Yes, and thank you, Robbie. And Robbie will be back up in just a bit. But there is some information in your packet on the Colorado Energy Office program. So we're going to move on to the Disaster Resilience Rebuilding Program. We have some individuals from the Department of Local Affairs here to talk about the state's grant and loan program. So I'll turn it over to Chris LeMay.
Thank you. I'm Chris LeMay. I'm North Central Regional Manager with the Department of Local Affairs. With me tonight, Tasha Albert, who's our Disaster Resiliency Recovery Manager, and Tim Caters is back there. He's also helping stand up this new program for our Disaster Resiliency Rebuilding Program. But next slide. So the Disaster Resiliency Rebuilding Program is a new program that was created after the state legislature this year passed the bill 22-206, and the governor signed the bill. The program has three components, and what I'm going to talk about tonight, one of those components you just heard about was the $10,000 incentive program that was for the electrification. The other portion of it is that it is creating the Office of Climate Preparedness, creates a new office in the state Office of Climate Preparedness. The third one is it creates a program, the Disaster Resiliency Rebuilding Program, and it's a statewide program. It goes back to state declared and covers state declared disasters dating back to 2018. So it's not just specific to the Marshall Fire, although that seems to be where the largest demand is right now. Next slide.
I got a question on that one. If I may, a quick question. Is there a separate bucket of funds? There's a 10K the state of Colorado was offering it at the bottom. So it says
That's yeah, you're talking about the hazard mitigation.
you go backwards.
Sorry, I was trying to figure out which slide you're looking at.
It says includes costs at the very bottom, includes costs associated with reducing those for natural hazards. Is that a separate incentive? Or is that part of the 10K? You know?
What I'm going to cover tonight is phase one of this program. And depending on how much money gets utilized in phase one, phase two, there's been some conversations about assisting with fire ready.
So it's a possibility.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that's confusing. So the program is a grant and loan program. And what it's intending to do is really kind of help fill the gap. So what will happen is we'll look at the value of what it costs to build back your home as with the existing footprint that was there. And then look at how much insurance you received, what your deductible was, if you received FEMA assistance, if you've got an SBA loan that's been awarded, and or any other grants, which could kind of a community foundation and what have you. And then we would determine that gap. And within that gap, people that are current property owner and are owner of the record at the date of the disaster would be eligible for the grant loan program. So next slide. The program would provide grants or loans up to $50,000 and grants up to $50,000. The loan is not tied to any sort of income level, but the grant is tied to an income level. The funds will be used for the primary residence at the time of disaster, so no second homes or vacation homes. As it is today in this current phase, there isn't any money for rental and multifamily properties through the program. So what we're looking at is single family homes, residences, duplexes, townhomes, and manufactured homes. Manufactured housing permanently affixed to a permanent foundation and taxed as real property that sustained major or severe damage. Costs that can be covered through the loan and grant is includes, but it's not limited to, but hard construction costs, your material labor, your use tax, your permit inspection fees, and your fees for your professional services by the architect. Next slide. The ownership of the single, the walls within the townhome. You have single ownership.
I lived in the town, those condo property, so you're saying that we might be able to qualify for it.
That's correct.
Even though it does say multi-family,
Townhome is considered single.
Yeah, we can't hear anything.
Sorry. So the question was, is he eligible for the program if he owns a townhome? And the answer is yes, because as we understand it, if the townhome, if you're the owner, you are responsible for the inside, and this program will cover the damages that are sustained on the inside of the townhome, but the outside, the HOA, will be responsible for covering, which is a different process. And regarding multifamily units, an apartment complex with stacked, where and it's more kind of like a rental property. So
Thanks, Natasha. So I'll start with the bottom on the loan, because I think that's a little simpler in that basically, regardless of your household income, you're eligible for the $50,000 loan. The loan will be structured similar to an SBA loan, 1.5% interest rates. You'll still be subject to standard loan underwriting procedures in reviewing it, but it's not tied to any income level. The grant, on the other hand, is going to depend on where your median income is. So this table, and this is all available on our website as well, but table kind of indicates where the household median income falls within Boulder County. So if you're a family of 4 and you're making $125,400, you would fall within the 100% AMI. And if you're a single person making $63,000 a year, you'd be 80%. Okay. So next slide. The reason that's important is that the scale of the grants is tied to where you fall within those ranges. So if you're 80% AMI and less, you could receive up to $50,000 in grant proceeds. If you're greater than 150 AMI, then you're not eligible for the grants, but you're still eligible for the loan.
Is that in kind of the time of loss, at the time of replacement? What year do you know?
Time of application.
Hold on, question.
Yeah, well, can you hold your question until the end of this and then we'll take questions?
All right. So yeah, and again, also on our website. Next slide. There's just some simple calculations. You know, to give you just kind of the idea, if you had a $750,000 rebuild cost, you got $600,000 in insurance deductible, FEMA, for a total of $660,000, you got a gap of $90,000. That's what these dollars could be used for. In the instance where you potentially get enough resources that you don't need, then you wouldn't be eligible for the grant loan. Next slide. So our next steps, it's a new program, and so we at the state have a few things we have to take care of as far as getting a third-party administrator to help us administer this program. We're going through that process as we speak. We're anticipating that we'll have the application available at the end of the month, if not early in September, and that funds would then be available late September, October. More information can be found on our website. The other resources, the Boulder County Resource Navigators, they have this information as well. And if you're reaching out and working with them, you'll be able to have access to the information as well.
We do have links to both we have links to both the DOLA. Okay, I think I can only have one. We have links to both the DOLA information and the resource navigators on page 4 of your handout. So we'll bring up the others.
And if you go to this link, you'll have questions. I believe it's explained everything. There's a question form here that you can fill out and send us a question that's more specific to your particular situation. And there's also a phone number that you can call, leave a voice message as well, and you can respond specifically to your situation or question.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our speakers for part 1. Now we'll take questions on anything that we've covered so far. Yes.
So it's regarding the loan. So there was a question in the previous workshop about subordination to an SBA loan. And they didn't really have a good answer on that. And say, well, if you're getting an SBA loan, you're not going to get this loan. Not true. But SBA, I don't think it's going to be subordinated on the loan. On the state, or they want to be prime.
And can you like repeat the question too for our virtual interview? Maybe not the whole question. Maybe just the last part.
I was asking a question regarding as far as kind of subordination of the loan, SBA taking precedence over the $50,000.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I have an answer for you tonight. But I think that's something that we can get up on our frequently asked questions. We've got on that website, we do have FAQ, and we'll make sure that we take that question back and see if we can get it.
I thought you had a way in the back.
Hi, my question, I have two questions. So the first one is around how is the estimated cost of rebuild going to be estimated? That is a huge chunk for calculated. And then the second part is for phase two, but in scope or is there a timeline? There's a lot of folks are trying to present finalization.
So question one was, how is the estimated rebuild cost being estimated? And then question two was, what is phase two of the Joel funding?
Yeah, so as far as the first question goes, we're still in the process of hiring or contract a third-party vendor to help us arrive at having the ability to determine those values. I can tell you that, there has been some conversations concerned that, well, we don't want to use the same software that was used by the insurance adjusters. And so I can assure you that, that's everybody's intuiting that, and they will be doing some data testing and running some real life examples to try and make sure that those values indeed are as accurate as they can. Understand
The builders out there?
No, it's, in order to administer the program and keep it manageable, and so that everybody's on the same playing field, they'll be using kind of the same standard being applied to every property. And it's something that, our division of housing does on a regular basis. It's not something we're new to us, but we do use third party outsource for that type of effort.
Okay, next question, we'll go right here.
Our Xcel delegate said you were going to cover something new that hadn't been said before. And then I didn't hear anything new, so I was wondering, what's new?
That's anything. Who wrote a check that I got to catch?
Well, let that resonate with you after.
We'll go right here to the back.
Thank you. I have a question about the $2,000 electrification incentive. One of the requirements is heat pump water heater, right? So can you clarify whether a tankless electric water heater will fall into that category?
The simple answer is no.
Okay.
It's not a heat, tankless electric water heater is not a heat pump water heater.
Okay.
It's electric resistance.
So what is the best resource for, we're in this process of trying to confirm that we are dotting all our I's and crossing all our T's to hit a certain level of rebate. And, while I understand this, it's pretty limited, right? And I want to make sure my builder's doing it right and all that, we're hitting all the benchmarks.
Yes.
What's the best resource for that? Like, okay.
Yeah. I don't have it handy. Yes.
So the question is, how do we figure out what all the requirements are of all of those different levels? And
Yeah, no, she set me up, so I'll just finish knocking it down. The useful links that contain all the links in the presentation all link to the requirements for all of the standards. We also have that consolidated into a single document that isn't. The requirements are known. It just isn't pretty yet. so we have those all consolidated into a single document as well. And once we finish the final claim form, it'll be all listed on it too.
so if you registered for this workshop, you should have gotten the slides in a PDF today. And in the presentation slides are the useful links that have detailed information about all of the different rebate levels down to every piece of equipment and what they all are. If you didn't register or you registered in between this afternoon and now, we will resend out the presentation PDF, which also has the slides in it. And if you didn't register and you just showed up, make sure you sign in the back so that we have your email so that you'll be on the list for those slides. We'll go way in the back.
Just to add real quick, make sure you check out the rebuildingbetter.org website because it's also on there. And then when we start talking about what the energy raters that's going to be another huge resource for you.
Okay, so I understand, the energy rebate. To me, I'm looking at, you saying, move into the house and know that I'm gonna have to, it's gonna cost me so much to live in the house. So I'm looking at the energy cost for electric and all the rebates. And then, but I like looking at gas. So have you calculated the difference between what a 2,000 square foot house is going to cost me an electric bill versus my gas bill? Because at one point at the Enclave, that was all electric. It was first made, developed, and then we got gas put in there because of the cost of electric was so high. It was up the hill. So is Xcel looked at that and said this is a bit of bet? And downrange, I'm talking about 10 years. Is that still gonna?
So the question is about the cost on your utility bill with all electric versus having gas for heating that.
In 10 years, we have no idea what natural gas especially is going to look like. Electric should be, we have a little bit better information on what electric's going to look like, because as we continue to change our generation fleet, the variable costs kind of slowly but surely disappear. Today, we're looking at roughly cost parity, like a well-built, high-performance house with good equipment should have basically cost parity from a utility bill perspective between natural gas versus all electric.
It should. Right?
Should.
It should. But can I have like a hybrid of part of it being electric and be able to cook with gas?
Absolutely. It depends on the standard you want to build to.
But you wouldn't get the rebates because you're not using an induction stove.
You wouldn't get the next gen rebate, but you could qualify for Energy Star 3.2. You qualify for IEC 21. You qualify for Zero Energy Ready homes. All three of those allow for gas furnaces and gas water heaters and gas cooking. The next gen is the only one that specifies which cooktop you use.
Plus the Colorado electrification incentive. You would be able to use that incentive as well. But I just wanted to point out in the back by the sink back there, there's an induction cooktop loaner program through the Energy Smart program in Boulder County. And I encourage you to sign up and take one home for a week and cook with it, because I think you'll be pleasantly surprised how well it works.
We'll go right up here. I saw your hand up. Any other questions? Let's go over here. Yeah.
You mentioned the loans at 1.5%. Big expiration.
So the question is, the loan is at 1.5%, but what's the payback?
30 years, 25.
I believe we're establishing this in 20 years.
You said 20?
20
years. Yes, 20 years.
We'll go right here.
So I have looked on the rebuilding site and have tried to dig into exactly what is required for each of those rebates. And it's, I've seen that one slide you had a bunch of times. And then from what I found, it sort of jumps into these, very thick things that I'm not going to read. So what would be really helpful, and I haven't found it yet, because when you just said you could do the next gen Energy Star with gas cooktop,
You cannot do next gen with
I thought that's what you
gas.
just said.
No, you cannot do.
So can you all produce some simpler to digest table that has all of those incentives and because a couple of things I've said, I've read says it's more advanced technology. Well, that's not very helpful. I need it more specific than that, but not a whole booklet.
Yeah, call me.
That's part of all of us to call you.
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Literally, that's right. 303 927 0025. So anyway, I am working on a document that's trying to demonstrate the overlap of those programs and whatnot. But again, it's to really understand it, you need to work with an energy rater who has experience with those programs. They're checklist-driven programs, and the details are in the checklist of what is required. And your builder, more so than you, your builder needs to understand what's required. And your energy rater or energy consultant is the one that's ultimately going to help them understand.
It's kind of a chicken and egg thing, because the builder says, we have a builder, he says, well, what do you want to build to? And we say, well, what's required? And he says, you say, well, the energy rater will tell us, but the builder says he's not going to talk to the energy rater until we have a more fleshed out design. So it's a chicken and egg thing.
Well,
for us.
that's an issue. We'll get into it in our next
Yeah,
section.
that's a great transition. Okay, so that's a great transition into part two. We've been talking about energy raters and how they fit into the larger team. So I'll ask our part speakers to take a seat just for a minute. Okay, so we'll ask our speakers to take a seat and we'll move into part two. So Robbie is going to be giving a short overview of energy raters.
Yeah, to get into your question a little bit more, when we're designing a house, the ideal way to design the house is to determine your goals for that house. And largely, for the Marshall fire rebuilding process, your goals are going to be driven by the incentives that are out there. All of the incentives are energy efficient incentives there. And ideally, what you would do is you would have what we call an integrated design process, where you're bringing together your builder, your architect, your energy rater, potentially an engineer, and HVAC contractor, and maybe some other trade partners. And you're talking about how you're going to do that, and you can get those questions specifically answered. You know, what's required and what's the value of that requirement there, because you're getting way down into the details there in that process, and you're designing the house with that in mind. Now, a lot of us are at different stages of construction, so you're trying to now layer on one of these incentive programs on top of a house that's already been designed. And that's possible with the Energy Star program, the DOE program. It's not very possible with Passive House to do that there. So if anybody's considering Passive House, we have a Passive House consultant here, and they can answer some questions for you. In general, what an energy rater, the first value proposition that an energy rater brings to you is that background knowledge about how these programs work, what's required, how you integrate it into your construction process, and whatnot. But one of the first things that they do is what's called an energy model of your house. Now, depending on the incentive program that you're working with, will depend on the detail of that energy model. But they're doing the energy model for a couple different reasons. First reason is to demonstrate, in essence, pre-qualification with the program. You have to achieve a certain level of performance to qualify for that program there. And it's based off of the energy model. And on some of the programs, it's based off of a specific energy rating index score. On some of the programs, it's based off of a BTU per square foot calculation, but you have to do the energy model there. While you're doing that energy model, you can do a couple different things. And some energy raters will offer this service to you. One is that you can also get code compliance documents through that energy model. The other is that you can do, in essence, what-if scenarios. So you can figure out the most cost-effective way to meet the program goal that you have. Because you can say, you can model, R60 attic insulation, which is basically what we call a prescriptive or a requirement, but then you can also model something less than that and do what we call a trade-off. And you can figure out, in essence, the best way to achieve your goal with your builder, because they might be reluctant to put R60 in the attic, for example, there. So that's a big part of it. The next value proposition that the energy rater and or energy consultant brings to the equation is that they're independent, and they do inspections during the construction process to verify that these program and or code requirements are actually taking place. And you need that not only from a quality assurance perspective, but you have to demonstrate compliance to some level in order to actually receive the incentive payment there. So they'll do a series of inspections through that. And that's called basically third-party verification. And all of these incentivized programs require that third-party verification there. So you'll get your builder will they'll work together to specify the right things, and then during inspection process, usually happens 3 or 4 inspections during the construction process, and they'll either pass the inspection or they'll fail it, and they'll have to fix something, and then they'll re-inspect, and then the process will continue on. Generally speaking, most energy raters inspect at rough stages, usually right after the HVAC equipment's been installed and before insulation and drywall's been installed, so they can look at framing details, they can look at HVAC details, they can potentially test duct work if you're using a ducted system. They can do all these things that are required by the programs, but also add value to your building process. The next time that they inspect is after insulation and before drywall, so they can look at air barrier details and how insulation's been installed and other details there, and make sure it's going correctly. The next time they would inspect is generally closer to final inspection, which would include what we call blower door testing and air leakage testing on the house to make sure that the house is airtight, but then they're also making sure that it's ventilated correctly, which is a requirement of code in these programs, that we build tight, ventilate right. And then they take all that information that they've gathered through the inspection process and they put it back into the energy model, and they confirm that what you projected in the projected energy model has actually been carried out, and you've demonstrated compliance at the end of the process there. So we've invited 3 energy rating companies / energy consulting companies to answer questions for you. We have a large energy rating company, which is Energy Logic, and Rusty will come up and answer some questions. We have a smaller energy rating company with Colleen, I forgot your company name.
Green Arrow.
Green Arrow?
Green Your Home.
Green Your Home, that's right. And then we have Andrew, I forgot your company name.
Call me,
Passive House Rocky Mountain. So Andrew is not necessarily an energy rater. He's more of an energy consultant and energy modeler. In the Passive House world, you don't necessarily have to be an energy rater to do that. He's also a designer as well, an architect as well. So they can come up. We can start questions, but I saw 2 questions real quick. That might be for me. So why don't you guys come up and we can pass the microphone around to you guys as well.
So my question to you is, so we signed with a contractor that they have to build the next gen and the 2021 code. So is it our responsibility as an owner to hire the energy rater, or is this something that the builder hires to make sure that they're in compliance with the contract?
Yeah, generally speaking, it's not. Okay, the question was whose responsibility it is to hire the energy rater and in essence manage that process. And generally speaking, it's the builder's responsibility. And I know
That's what I wanted.
okay, so hopefully it will pass the microphone to somebody else to answer the question.
I just have a quick question about how much this process costs. We're, from start to finish, is this a $20,000 project? Because we have raters coming to meetings and then raters going to the house and all of that. So it sounds to me like you're needing the rebate potentially.
Yeah, so I'll just stop you there. It's nowhere near $20,000 per house. And because we can't talk about pricing specifically in this type of scenario, because it's basically Federal Trade Commission type things. But in general, the cost is somewhere maybe in the $1,000 to $2,000 range for this service there. Except I would say with the passive house, it would be maybe double that in the passive house one.
Yeah, definitely double. There's another party, there's like, we're talking about the layers of verification. There's a verifier, of the verifiers too. So they're also involved and they're verified by the institutes. So there's a lot of QA in that. There's a lot of hands on that process. But they negotiated, I believe, $3,500 for the verification process. For them, that's usually, I think that's about $1,000 or maybe $1,500 on what the typical rates are. So everybody's kind of chipping in. That's also why, of course, Xcel's providing on top of something.
We should be working with our engineers to solve the software yet to be able to go through the program. One for energy star next year. And they said, we don't have the software to do it yet. When can you expect to do it?
So that's a known quantity, and there's already been a workaround created. The question was that there isn't a software yet to model that pre-qualification. So for Energy Star 3.2, Energy Star has said that you should try to achieve an energy rating index of 50 or lower to pre-qualify the house. And for the Xcel incentive payments, they're using that as well. So if software comes out and it changes, you've already locked in your incentive payment. For the DOE Zero Energy Ready Home Program, Xcel is also accepting that preliminary rating to be 50 or less, but if you want to actually certify the house for that program, you should be looking at a 45 or less for the DOE Zero Energy Ready Home Program. Next gen would be the Energy Star level at 50 or less.
I have two questions on the energy raters. Question number one, do they provide different scope of services from simple first reading calculation all the way to prescription on better insulation? That's a scope of service. That's number one.
So
the question number two is, how much do we have to budget for the energy rangers? And as far as simple service would be more comprehensive service for budgeting for their part of the cost.
Okay, so we already answered the second question with regards to average, ballpark figures of the fees. I'll let Colleen start with your first question, which was scope of services.
Yeah, many of us offer different scope of services. Most of us will do anything in up to fees. Don't do fees. I won't do fees.
Can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. I don't do fees, but I do like.
We don't know what that is.
Passive house, sorry. So I'll do everything up to that. So I can do as little as code compliant, or I can do as much as Energy Star and the governor's rebates and all that. Most of your energy rating companies are going to be like that, where they're going to offer you whatever level of service you have. It's the higher programs that are going to be harder to find the services for, like the passive house. But most of us would offer any and all of those services, and then just the more certifications you want to add on, they'll just be that additional fee to get that rebate. But in general, I pay for myself, and that's, I shouldn't cost you anything on your project because I'm here to get the rebates for you without, with as smoothly as possible. And so typically my services will gain you more money than what they're going to cost you. So.
Yeah, we function similarly when we're working with the builder and we're creating our initial scope of work and proposal. We'll go, do you want us just to get you to the certification level that you already know, or do you want us to run scenario analyses of the various, what you would need to do to meet different levels of the program? So that's what all be negotiated up front in the builder contract.
And for passive house, it's a little different.
So passive house is like a pure performance standard, basically. So Rob was earlier talking about the checklist. Now that you guys have this long list of kind of
things that you have to make sure are as part of the building. That's about it. It's only a few items, but those items are very high level of performance. And so the energy modeling is really integrated at the beginning. So you have to design with the energy model at the beginning with a dedicated team. And then we have best house consultant designer, which I am. We have best house tradespeople, which are the builders. And then we have a best house certified. So there's kind of a tiered system. So it's invested throughout the process. Part of the good thing about that, and I think Rob made this clear, is the incentive is not designed to cover all those costs. The incentives are designed to incentivize, obviously. But what we do is, because the performance standard, as another one was talking about, was that like at R60 roof, sometimes we want to know, like, is that the best place for that R60? We put R60 somewhere else, maybe, move things around a little bit. Can we lower the cost but get better performance? That's all the reason. So it's a little bit different from the checklist approach, but it's a lot more design work in that sense. So it can be slower, it's not necessarily based on who the team is, but the costing is, it's not apples to apples compared to maybe this Energy Star this. So yeah, it's a different process. So it's just, you have to get accustomed to it, but once you get accustomed to it, it's quite enjoyable. And you get pretty spectacular results, I should say, in the form of a building that's about 20% code as far as the energy and cooling costs are concerned.
Yeah, Bobby, you haven't answered the second question. How much do we need to budget for a comprehensive survey from the all the way to consultation through certification? Assuming we do the whole thing.
The question is, what do you need to budget for this type of service? And we talked about that earlier. It's somewhere in the $1,000 to $2,000 range for most of the incentives, and maybe double that or a little bit more for the passive house certification through going to that.
Thank you.
So
One is to be very tight for proposals, right? If they roll in the signal earlier, and at the end, we're going to get a check again when we're already paid the house. Is it reasonable to go to a builder and say, make our last payment to incentives for later? Reasonable thing. 17,000. Did I make that my last?
From my perspective, it's very reasonable. I think you basically have a performance criteria, and if they don't meet that performance criteria, there's something in your contract that could address that. I don't know what you think.
As a former builder, yeah. Not as an energy rater, but I used to be a contractor also, and I think that would be completely reasonable.
Sorry. Yeah, I do want to clarify that we have decided that we are not going to allow these rebates to be directly cut to a builder. And that's because given the dollar amounts we're talking about, we're really wary of the risk of getting involved in a dispute between you and your builder. So we'll write the checks, but we're only going to write them. Other rebates we do allow to reassign, but we're getting the dollar amounts we're talking about going way beyond even small claims court for issues here, and we don't want to inject ourselves in that at all. So I just want to make that really expressly clear. Oh no.
So we designed we do have a Sagamore passive house project we've been working on. And boy, I hear you about this, they're working with insurance companies in the background. And so like that puts the pressure on us as the build design team to get that house certified so that the client has the money to pay us at the end too. So in some ways it actually you could use it as contractually as a way as a very, very powerful incentive to get an actually well-built house rather than racing to the next one. If you have some sort of dispute, just forget about it, right? So that's one way to look at it technically.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So my builder claims they're going to build and that needs to be verified by the verifier for us to get the rebate.
No.
Or just
So the question was that his builder is building to the 2021 IECC, so that's the energy code, and how is that verified? So the first thing is it has to be permitted under that. So you need to make sure that you are working with the jurisdiction, so that would be Louisville, Superior, or Boulder, unincorporated Boulder County, that it's permitted correctly, because especially in Superior and Louisville, you have an option of which code to permit to. You don't have to permit to the newest one, that zero energy one in Louisville, for example. You could go to just the 2021, but they also offer the 2018 as a possibility there. So you have to be clear how the house is permitting. That is the primary step in getting that incentive of $7,500. That in essence locks in that $7,500. If you pass the code inspections, you'll get that $7,500. Now, one of the additional services that energy raters offer is they can help with that code compliance there. So that's a service that they often add in because they're going to be there anyway to verify for Energy Star or something like that. But with the verification on verification on verification part, that's kind of a passive house unique thing that's only really happens in the passive house world.
Xcel, are you considering solar farms for people that were impacted with
Solar what? So the question was about solar farms, community solar. That's outside of my area of expertise and knowledge.
There are a few community solar farms coming online. There's one through Solar United Neighbors, and that's so there's solar farms and there's solar bulk purchasing, and so anyone affected by the fire can participate in any of those programs. There's more information in your packet with a link to where you can find more information about the solar incentives.
In this packet or the one
In the workshop 3 packet, the hand.
I just want to add one more point to that before we move on too quickly. The ERI, all the standards that we've talked about, I want to clarify that solar cannot be used to meet the performance standards to achieve the incentive level. So that is because we want the best house built. We don't want a marginal house built and throw a bunch of solar on it and call it good enough.
You mentioned that the GC generally hires the energy raters. Does that mean that we have to tell the GC we need to hire one, or are they going to do that as part of the process?
Repeat the question back.
So I'm sorry, say that again.
So you mentioned that the energy rater is generally hired by the general contractor. So my question is, do we need to tell them, hey, you better hire one of these folks, or do they do that on their own?
So the question was, does the homeowner need to tell the general contractor whether or not they need to hire an energy rater? I think it would depend on what level of the program you're going to be going for. If you're just doing the 2021 IECC, you can function without an energy rater. But as soon as you go to any of these above code programs, Energy Star, DOE, anything like that, you will need an energy rater. Hopefully your builder will know that, but if they don't, then I guess it would fall on you.
And just to add to that, I'm seeing a lot of people calling me that are working with custom builders. In general, custom builders have not built to the Energy Star program or the DOE program before. And that's just what I'm seeing from people calling in. So yes, it would be very worthwhile for you to remind your builder that they need to engage with an energy rater.
I would say in general, most custom home builders also are familiar with an energy rater as well, because oftentimes they'll need one to do some trade-offs throughout their building to assist with their building methods and their code compliance and their budget and things like that. So many of your custom home builders may be familiar with energy raters, just not necessarily with all of these programs necessarily.
And I think that's true too in the Boulder County area. Boulder County's been requiring that for quite a while. So most of them are more familiar.
Just from past vows, do not talk to, I think you alluded to this, don't make that decision halfway through, make that decision at the very beginning. And have conversations with people. We compiled a list to share with Xcel of certified builders and designers to contact first. And then if you go, there's a lot of resource pages too on where to start as a homeowner. Passive House, just look up Passive House Rocky Mountains. For instance, we have a direct link to that. I think Rocky Mountain, RMPBS has a great page now of resources and did a great series of Passive House too. So if you go on RMPBS, they have a huge list of resources as well. But you have to make that decision at the beginning. You kind of say, hey, I was thinking halfway through of the design, then it's very costly.
I was gonna add to that. So I agree with getting in early, even if you're anywhere above code. I was looking at my builders, asking them what dishwasher are you going to install? What filter are you going to install? This was in the very beginning of the design phases. So it is important to get those details ironed out before, you know, it gets too late down the line and you don't have the option to go back and make sure you cover your base to get
The last thing I'll just add to that is, again, go to the rebuildingbetter.org website, and especially if you have not contracted with an architect or a builder yet, there's a whole section there about questions that you can ask your builder that will help you understand their level of comfort with these programs and whatnot, and as you're trying to figure out who to build on.
All right, we're almost at 7:30 here. Do you have a quick question? Okay, one more quick question, and then we're gonna open it up for networking. The question is, when is the deadline for the rebate paperwork?
The deadline right now that we've set is the end of 2026. Depending on now we can move that if if the construction timelines are not going to accommodate that. If we're seeing that across the board, we can move that date.
I noticed that there are at least one other energy rating company in the audience. So if there are other energy raters in the audience, please raise your hand because we're going to do Nathan, raise your hand. So that people, if you want to have a discussion, you know, one-on-one with one of the raters, make sure you know who to talk to.
Okay, we have Energy Smart information up here. This is also included in your packet on the end of page 4. So if you have any questions about anything covered in any of our workshops that we've had so far, anything about any of the certification levels, equipment, performance standards, energy raters, call this number, this is Robbie's direct line, or email them, and you can speak directly with Robbie or someone else on the Energy Smart team to get all of your questions answered. Now we're going to open it up for networking. And before I do that, I just want to mention, speaking of Passive House, our next workshop on September 7th, we'll be screening the recently published PBS documentary, Colorado Voices, Building Back Better After the Marshall Fire. And if anyone has seen it, they might already recognize Andrew. He was featured in the film. And so we'll be talking more about Passive House in our next workshop in September. So thank you all for coming. And everyone will be here for the next 30 minutes. So feel free to ask your questions.
I just wanted to clarify one thing. Term on the loan is 30 years, not 20.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.